There is a place in the world where the sky is so enormous and the land so flat that you can watch a storm approach for 3 hours before it reaches you. A place where winter temperatures drop to minus 40 degrees, where summer brings scorching heat and sudden floods, where survival is not guaranteed. It is earned every single day through skill, toughness, and an understanding of the land that takes generations to develop. This place is the Mongolian steppe. And from this place, one of the harshest, most remote environments on Earth, came the largest contiguous land empire in the history of the world. At its peak, the Mongol Empire stretched from the Pacific coast of China to the doorstep of Western Europe, from the frozen forests of Siberia to the scorching deserts of Persia. It covered 12 million square miles. It contained more than 100 million people. It connected, for the first time in history, the civilizations of East Asia, Central Asia, the Middle East, and Europe into a single political system. And it was built in...
To understand what Genghis Khan built, you must first understand what existed before him. In the late 12th century, the Mongolian steppe was not a unified territory. It was a patchwork of competing tribes: the Mongols, the Tatars, the Merkits, the Naimans, the Karaites, dozens of clans locked in a cycle of warfare, raiding, and mutual hostility that had persisted for centuries. There was no central authority, no written language, no permanent cities, no currency. Life on the steppe was organized around the ger, a circular felt tent, engineered over thousands of years to be assembled and disassembled in under an hour, insulated against extreme cold and ventilated against summer heat. Everything a Mongolian family owned had to be transportable on horseback, because everything depended on movement, following the grass, following the water, following the seasons. The horse was not a convenience in Mongolian society. It was the foundation of everything. Mongolian children learned to ride before they learned to walk. By age...
The early life of Temujin reads less like the biography of a conqueror and more like a survival story. His father, Yesugei, was a minor tribal chief, respected enough to have followers, but not powerful enough to protect his family from the violence that defined steppe life. When Temujin was around 9 years old, his father was poisoned by members of the Tatar tribe, rivals who had been enemies of the Mongols for generations. Yesugei died on the journey home. What followed was devastating. The clan that Yesugei had led abandoned his widow and children almost immediately. In the brutal economics of steppe survival, a family without a warrior patriarch was a liability. Mouths to feed, no fighters to protect them, no value in a raid. They were left to fend for themselves. Temujin's mother, Holin, kept her children alive through sheer determination, foraging for roots, berries, and small animals on the steppe. Years of poverty and exposure that would have broken most people. Then, things got worse. A rival clan, the Taichiyuts, captured Temujin and enslaved him, placing a wooden collar around his neck and using him as a servant. He escaped, hid in a river for days, and was helped by a family who sheltered him at enormous personal risk. He was a teenager with no followers, no weapons, no standing, and no reasonable prospects. But Temujin had something that does not appear in any inventory. He had an extraordinary ability to read people, to inspire loyalty, to make men feel that...
The Mongol army that Genghis Khan built was, by any objective measure, the most effective military force that existed on Earth between the fall of Rome and the rise of modern nation-states. Understanding why requires understanding what made it different. Most armies of this period fought in relatively rigid formations: infantry blocks, cavalry charges, siege warfare. The Mongols fought differently. Their entire military doctrine was built around speed, mobility, and deception. A Mongol army could cover 60 to 80 miles per day.
an almost incomprehensible rate of movement for the period. They accomplished this by traveling light and carrying multiple horses per rider. Each warrior had between 3 and 5 horses, rotating between them to keep the animals fresh. This meant a Mongol force could sustain a pace that would exhaust any pursuing or retreating enemy. Second difference. The Mongol military was organized on a decimal system. Units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000 warriors, called a tumen. This system allowed for precise command and communication across enormous distances, and it was entirely meritocracy.
In 1211, Genghis Khan turned his attention south. The target was the Jin dynasty, the rulers of northern China, a civilization of perhaps 60 million people, protected by the Great Wall, by vast fortified cities, and by professional armies far larger than anything the Mongols could field. On paper, the contest was absurd. The Mongols numbered perhaps 100,000 warriors against a civilization of tens of millions. What happened over the next several years was one of the most dramatic military campaigns in history. The Mongols did not attempt to fight the Jin armies head-on in conventional pitched battle. Instead, they used their speed and mobility to strike everywhere simultaneously, raiding deep into Jin territory, destroying supply lines, burning crops, disrupting the economic infrastructure that kept the Jin military functioning. When they did fight, they used tactics that the Jin commanders had no answer for. The famous feigned retreat. Mongol cavalry would engage, then appear to flee in panic. Pursuing Jin soldiers would break formation to...
In 1218, an event occurred that would redirect the course of history. A Mongol trade caravan carrying merchants and goods west into the Khwarezmian Empire, the dominant Islamic power of Central Asia, was seized by a local governor. The merchants were executed, accused of being spies. Genghis Khan sent 3 ambassadors to the Khwarezmian Shah, demanding an explanation and compensation. The Shah had the lead ambassador executed and sent the other 2 back with their beards shaved off, a profound insult in Mongolian culture. It was, by any measure, one of the worst diplomatic decisions in the history of civilization. What followed was the near total destruction of one of the most advanced civilizations on Earth. The Khwarezmian Empire at this point was wealthy, sophisticated, and powerful. Its cities, Samarkand, Bukhara, Urgench, were among the greatest centers of Islamic learning, trade, and culture in the world. Libraries of irreplaceable manuscripts, schools of mathematics, astronomy, medicine, architecture of extraordinary beauty. Genghis Khan's response to the insult was systematic and total. The Mongol army swept into Central Asia in 1219.
In 1227, during a campaign against the Xia kingdom in what is now northwestern China, Genghis Khan died. He was somewhere between 60 and 65 years old. The cause of his death is not definitively known. The most widely accepted account suggests he died from injuries sustained after falling from a horse. Other accounts suggest illness, possibly typhoid. A persistent legend, largely discredited, claims he was killed by a captive princess. What is known with certainty is this: he died on campaign, still working, still conquering. Genghis Khan's burial was kept secret by his own instructions. According to tradition, the funeral procession killed anyone it encountered along the route to the burial site to prevent the location from becoming known. The grave was then concealed, trees planted over it, the ground leveled, and a river reportedly diverted to flow over the site. To this day, the location of Genghis Khan's tomb is unknown. It is one of history's most extraordinary archaeological mysteries, and given the scale of the concealment effort, it may remain unknown forever. Before his death, Genghis Khan had established a system for dividing his empire among his sons and grandsons.
For most of Western Europe, the Mongols were a rumor before they were a reality. Stories filtered west from Russia and Hungary of an invincible army of horsemen from the east destroying everything in their path. Most European rulers dismissed these reports as exaggeration. The Mongols were far away. Surely they would stop. They did not stop. In 1241, a Mongol army under the command of Batu Khan and the brilliant general Subutai, perhaps the most tactically gifted commander in the entire history of the Mongol Empire, swept into Central Europe simultaneously through Poland and Hungary. The Polish army was destroyed at the Battle of Legnica. The Hungarian army was annihilated at the Battle of Mohi, a campaign so precisely executed that modern military historians still study it. At Mohi, Subutai allowed the Hungarian army to believe they had successfully defended their bridgehead across the Sajo River, then launched a devastating flanking attack while a diversionary force occupied their attention. The Hungarians broke and fled, directly into a corridor that Subutai had deliberately.
Here is the part of the Mongol story that surprises most people. After the conquest came the peace. For roughly a century, from around 1260 to 1360, the Mongol Empire maintained a period of relative stability across its vast territories that historians call the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol Peace. Trade routes that had previously been fragmented, dangerous, and controlled by dozens of competing powers were now unified under a single administration. The Silk Road, the network of overland trade routes connecting China to Europe, had never in its history been so safe or so efficiently organized. Merchants, diplomats, missionaries, and travelers moved across the continent with a freedom that would not be seen again for centuries. The Mongol postal relay system, the YAM, maintained stations every 25 miles across the empire, allowing messages and goods to move at speeds that astonished contemporaries. A Venetian merchant named Marco Polo traveled to China and spent 17 years at the court of Kublai Khan, an account so extraordinary that many of
Empires do not fall in a single moment. They unravel. The Mongol Empire's decline was driven by a combination of forces that any historian of empire would recognize. The vastness of the territory made unified governance nearly impossible. Communication across 12 million square miles, even with the YAM relay system, was slow. Regional governors developed their own interests, their own alliances, their own ambitions. The Mongols, ironically, were victims of their own success. As conquerors, they were peerless. As administrators of settled civilizations, they had to adapt to systems and cultures that were fundamentally different from their own. Many did. Kublai Khan effectively became a Chinese emperor. The Ilkhans converted to Islam and became patrons of Persian culture. The Golden Horde adopted the customs of the peoples they ruled. In doing so, they became less Mongol, and the bonds of identity that had held the empire together weakened. The Black Death struck the Mongol heartland too. Trade revenues collapsed. Subject peoples began to resist. In 1368, the Yuan dynasty in China was overthrown by a Chinese rebel leader who established the Ming dynasty. In 1380, a Russian coalition inflicted the first major defeat on the Golden Horde at the Battle of...
What do we make of Genghis Khan? He was, by any measurement, responsible for the deaths of tens of millions of people. Entire civilizations disrupted or destroyed. Cities that had stood for 1,000 years reduced to rubble in days. Languages and cultures and bodies of knowledge lost forever. And yet, he created the largest land empire in history. He unified trade routes that connected the world. He established a system of religious tolerance remarkable for its era. Mongol law explicitly protected the freedom of religious practice across the empire. He was the son of a murdered minor chief, abandoned on a freezing steppe as a child, who rose to rule a territory larger than any before or since.